Just because the wife is so beautiful, her husband always suspects her of having an affair behind his back. Paul used to take advantage of Nellie's shower to rummage through his wife's bag to see if she had any secrets. Even when he sees his wife dressed well outside, Paul rushes to follow her to see who his wife meets. We can't really blame Paul for this. His wife, Nellie, has a very hot body and often goes out to play with friends of the opposite sex, and every time Paul asked her who she went out with, Nellie only replied friends, friends, friends again. In the end, Paul couldn't take it anymore, so he decided to take revenge on his wife. It started a few years ago. Paul's resort is about to open. At that time, he was introduced by a friend and knew Nellie. The two people who just met were struck by love. After the resort went into operation, the two also celebrated their wedding, and the two of them were extremely happy during the wedding. A few years later they gave birth to their first child. Nellie is becoming more and more loving now, because of the natural beauty of the nearby area. Paul's resort began to attract more and more patrons. The thing that attracts them to this place is partly the beautiful scenery here, and partly it must be said that the female owner of the resort is really beautiful. One day the resort was extremely busy, but Nellie in charge of the reception disappeared. When Paul went upstairs he found the curtain in the living room had been drawn inside the room where Nellie's voice could be heard. After opening the door Paul saw his wife and a strange man. Paul knows this man. Paul heard that he is a rich guy and often goes to resorts. Paul didn't even have time to open his mouth when Nellie said that her friend invited her to see a movie with lights, so they pulled up the curtains to increase the effect, Nellie said, and then did a very cute move, as if she was trying to hide something. Although Paul didn't say anything, he was very sensitive to realize that it must not be that simple. Paul went to the beach in a daze and told himself to stop thinking nonsense. A few days later, Nellie comes home from shopping. Behind her is a guest helping her with her bags. The guest is around 50 years old, a photographer. Before leaving, the photographer even kissed Nellie's hand. The two of them are still going to go shopping together next time. Seeing this scene, Paul's expression was extremely complicated. Nellie said she wanted to go home to her mother to play, but she wore a very sexy long dress and beautiful makeup. Paul felt something was wrong because the previous times when Nellie went to her mother's house, she dressed very simply, but this time not only wearing high heels, Nellie also wore red lipstick. Paul followed and discovered that this road was not the way to Nellie's mother's house. Next, the rich guy he used to watch movies with Nellie also appeared in the alley. By the time Paul chased them, both were gone. Paul rushed to his mother-in-law's house to check his speculation, but before he could enter the house, he heard Nellie's familiar voice. She said with a smile that her parents weren't at home, so she sat here waiting for them. Paul also found an excuse to say that he had a job or just passed by. But even though he saw his wife appear near his mother-in-law's house, Paul still couldn't stop speculating. On the way home, Paul's mind was always thinking about the scene of his wife and the other guy watching a movie. A few days later, the beautiful wife, Nellie, who was a housewife, disappeared again. Paul went to the beach to look for it. As expected, he saw a scene he didn't want to see. Nellie is surfing in a canoe and the canoe driver is none other than the rich guy. Paul followed the two of them and saw the two of them coming out of the forest together. The guy even helped Nellie get on the boat. The movement seems very familiar. Watching the two people leave, Paul was weak and fell to the ground. This man under 40 years old was so angry that he almost had a heart attack. It wasn't until late that night that Paul came home. Nellie seems to realize something. She is very anxiously waiting for him, looking at her husband's dejected look. Nellie talks to Paul, but Paul doesn't answer. Nellie was a bit confused. She cried and asked Paul why come home so late. What happened in the end? She said she was very worried. Facing his wife's questioning, this time Paul was willing to speak his mind. Nellie said she and the guy have absolutely nothing to do with each other. Although Paul doesn't believe it, his wife's eyes don't seem like he's lying. Paul thinks maybe it's true that he's thinking too much. They finally hug and go back to the way they used to be. After a while, Nellie didn't cause any more trouble. One day in the resort, a photographer showed a video that he filmed for everyone to see, including many beautiful scenes of the town, of course, including the beautiful landlady Nellie. But the video shows Nellie. It's the scene where she and the guy hang out at the beach. As soon as Nellie's hot body appeared on the screen, the men were very excited. The scene of Nellie and the young man's love glances made Paul so angry that he broke his wine glass. In Paul's head, he began to think miscellaneously. For example, the scene where his beautiful wife is sitting at the coffee shop waiting for the guy, or the scene where she talks on the phone for hours with him. The more he thought, the angrier he got. Paul threw his wine glass. Paul lost control and walked up to kick everyone out. Nellie asked Paul to calm down but was immediately slapped by Paul. The relationship between husband and wife becomes strained. Paul told Nellie that as soon as he saw such pictures, he lost control. To comfort and encourage Paul, Nellie promises to keep her distance from the opposite sex in the future. But things didn't get better at all because of Nellie's concession. Paul became so mad that he didn't see his wife for 10 minutes and immediately questioned who she was with. Nellie has to explain every day. She's so miserable. The more important thing is that no matter how Nellie explained, Paul wouldn't believe it even hit her. Over time, even the resort's guests know that the couple is constantly arguing. Business was affected. Nellie was also tortured to death. One day there was a heavy rain in the town. The resort had a power cut, so Nellie went to each room to bring candles for guests. This is a very normal action, but still being peeped and speculated by Paul. Before sleeping, Paul went up to the attic to close the window and accidentally discovered his wife's bracelet. This made him start thinking again. Paul thinks his wife must have been sneaking around here with some man and dropped the bracelet. After returning to his room, Paul immediately questioned his wife, and Nellie explained that maybe it was dropped by the time he gave the candle to the guest. But Paul didn't believe it at all. Nellie is very tired and doesn't want to say anything more. In the middle of the night, Paul suddenly woke up and found that his wife was not around. He rushed to his son's room to find it, and found that his wife was also not there. Paul immediately went to the front door of each room to eavesdrop on his wife's voice. Suddenly Paul remembered the photographer who was close to his wife today also stayed here. Opening the door to the room, Paul found that there were 2 glasses of wine in the room. After looking around and still couldn't find his wife, Paul immediately took his anger out on the other side. He also blamed the photographer for seducing his wife, even saying he intended to lure her to run away with him. The photographer got mad and kicked Paul out of the room. When Paul came back to the room to find Nellie was back, he got mad while saying harsh words and beating Nellie. The next day Nellie went to the hospital for treatment. She just got there and Paul came too, in front of the doctor, but Paul did not show any respect. Not only did he not realize his mistake, but also loudly cursed his wife for being a public car. Nellie can only cry in pain right now. She doesn't know where she went wrong in the end. A lot of things are her husband's imagination and blame her. The doctor saw the 2 of them and sent them both home. After coming home, Paul became even more abusive. He forced his wife to take sedatives, then locked the door. After Nellie fell asleep, Paul tied her to the bed. He did it to avoid Nellie leaving in the middle of the night. But Paul's frenzied behavior hasn't stopped. When standing shaving, the image of his wife cheating with another man appears in my head. In the end, Paul could not hold back the fire of his heart and used a razor to kill his wife. But when he came out of the bathroom, he found his wife completely healed and lying on the bed. This is also the last scene of the movie. The movie ends there too. So did Paul kill his wife in the end? The director didn't give us the answer. This movie reminds me of the movie Don't Talk to Strangers. I felt that the male lead in that movie was scary. But now watching this movie called Hell still gives me chills, but I see it's all because of both of them being a wife, but Nellie's actions are out of proportion.